John Deere reacting tonight, the company, after a reaction after former President Donald Trump.
So space, aerospace, transportation, general engineering products, military products.
At a roundtable in Pennsylvania, former President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 200% tariff on John Deere machinery imported from Mexico.
The standoff between President Donald Trump and one of America's most iconic manufacturers, John Deere, has become a flashpoint in the broader drama of trade policy. Who pays when global supply chains collide with unilateral U.S. tariffs? In the weeks since Trump announced a sweeping reciprocal tariff regime and threatened punitive levies on any company moving production offshore, Deere has been both a target and a cautionary tale. Caught between Washington's desire to bring jobs home and the economic realities of modern farm equipment manufacturing. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. John Deere's roots run deep in the heartland. Since its founding in 1837, the company has embodied American ingenuity, growing from a small blacksmith shop in Illinois to the world's largest agricultural machinery maker by the 21st century. Deere green tractors and combines were as much a symbol of U.S. rural life as red barns and golden wheat fields. Yet behind that green paint lies a global production network, steel milled in Japan and South Korea, precision engine parts from Germany, electronic control units from Malaysia, and increasingly assembled components in Mexico to serve North and South American markets cost-effectively. That shift toward nearshoring was a pragmatic response to escalating labor costs in the United States, but it set Deere on a direct collision course with President Trump's hardline trade agenda. When Trump took office in January 2025 for his second non-consecutive term, he arrived with a playbook drafted by his senior trade advisor, Peter Navarro, and informed by the Project 2025 blueprint. This fair trade vision called for sweeping reciprocal tariffs, 10% on all imports as a baseline, rising to 20% or more for nations with which the U.S. ran large trade deficits, like the European Union or China. Notably, the plan even spelled out a 200% tariff on any U.S. company that relocated manufacturing abroad, an explicit threat aimed at firms such as General Motors and John Deere that had moved production to Mexico or other low-cost jurisdictions. Economists across the spectrum warned that such extreme measures would backfire, driving up costs for American consumers and sowing chaos in supply chains. And yet, Trump's rhetoric only grew harsher. On April 2, 2025, Trump signed an executive order declaring his reciprocal tariff program, setting the 10% baseline for all imports effective April 5th, with customized fair rate surcharges for countries with large deficits. That same order stipulated that any American corporation shifting significant production offshore would face a retroactive 200% levy on goods imported back into the United States. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, who in the prior administration had championed pragmatic trade negotiations, was left to implement these aggressive measures. John Deere's management had long analyzed production footprints to optimize costs and responsiveness to market demand. With U.S. labor rates rising and the North American Free Trade Agreement successor pact, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, providing tariff-free access, it was logical by 2024 for Deere to expand its Monterrey, Mexico assembly lines for mid-sized tractors and combined headers destined for the U.S. Midwest. The move shaved thousands of dollars per machine, allowing Deere to offer competitive pricing to cash-strapped farmers still recovering from low commodity prices. But when Navarro publicly threatened a 200% punitive tariff on Deere's Mexico-assembled tractors, company executives were blindsided. A Deere spokesperson told Reuters on April 5th that we are carefully evaluating these new policies and will work with the administration to find solutions that protect both American jobs and our customers' needs. Internally, engineers and plant managers scrambled to estimate the cost impact of a 200% levy on a $200,000 tractor, an effective tax of $400,000 per unit that would render Deere's product unaffordable for many rural dealers. The threat of spiking prices led to a rush to purchase existing Mexico-built inventory before tariffs kicked in. In the week following the April 5th announcement, U.S. tractor deliveries jumped over 15% year-on-year as farmers feared they'd pay double for new machines otherwise. Yet that preemptive buying only deepened the uncertainty. If tariffs were applied retroactively, who would foot the bill? It is farmers, Deere, and customers who ultimately feel the pinch of such policy whiplash. American grain growers already reeling from years of low corn and soybean prices, had been eyeing a recovery in equipment spending as improved yields and expanding export markets slowly boosted farm incomes. But now their plans were thrown into turmoil. Should they invest in new Deere machines at current prices, risking a massive retroactive tariff, or delay purchases and contend with aging equipment and lost productivity? At a recent farm show in Kansas City, dealers reported that many growers were just sitting on the sidelines, unwilling to commit to major capital outlays amid tariff uncertainty. "I've got a waiting list of 10 farmers who want X-Series tractors," said one Midwestern dealer. But if Trump slaps a 200% tariff on Mexico machines, they'll cancel orders faster than you can say harvest. State farm bureaus have begun lobbying the White House directly, urging exemptions for agricultural machinery. They argue that punitive levies on tractors would harm domestic production more than offshore competition. "There's no way American farmers can pay $600,000 for a tractor and survive," testified the Illinois Farm Bureau before Congress on April 15th. Yet Republicans aligned with Trump remain wary of any carve-outs, fearing that exemptions would undermine the administration's negotiators at the World Trade Organization and in bilateral talks, sending a message that the president's tariff threats are hollow. Facing this existential policy risk, John Deere has deployed a multi-pronged strategy. First, the company accelerated plans to shift some final assembly operations back to its U.S. plants in Waterloo, Iowa, and Moline, Illinois, even at higher labor costs, providing a tariff-free pathway for critical models. Deere CFO Ryan Campbell confirmed in an April 20th earnings call that we're expediting capital investments in our U.S. facilities to mitigate potential tariff exposure. Second, Deere sought to engage directly with the Commerce Department to secure product-specific tariff exclusions. During the first Trump administration, thousands of steel and aluminum importers successfully won temporary exemptions under Section 232. Deere's government affairs team hoped similar carve-outs could be negotiated for agricultural equipment components. Those discussions are ongoing, but early indications suggest the administration is reluctant to grant broad machinery exclusions, fearing political backlash from the president's base. Third, Deere is exploring supply chain reconfiguration, sourcing more components domestically or relocating parts production to other tariff-neutral countries such as Canada or low-tariff European partners. But retooling supplier networks and obtaining new certifications can take months or years, too slow to address an imminent tariff deadline. John Deere is far from alone. General Motors, Volvo Cars, Caterpillar, and dozens of other manufacturers have either paused guidance or withdrawn full-year forecasts due to tariff uncertainty. According to a Reuters survey, industry analysts warned that the chaos in trade policy is chilling corporate investment decisions across sectors: automotive, aerospace, electronics, and beyond. By April 29th, GM had pulled its 2025 earnings outlook entirely, even as first-quarter results beat estimates, precisely because we have no idea what trajectory our trade policies will take, said GM CEO Mary Barra. Similarly, UPS and FedEx have withheld shipping volume projections, fearing that unpredictable import surcharges will disrupt global freight flows. Wall Street's reaction has been equally unsettled. Broad market indices remained range-bound in late April, as investors hesitated to price in either rapid de-escalation or further escalation of tariffs. The political stakes are high for Trump in the 2024 election. He carried key farm states such as Iowa, Indiana, and Ohio by appealing to rural voters dissatisfied with prior administration's trade policies, promising to crack down on China, renegotiate trade deals, and protect domestic jobs. Yet opening a new front by targeting John Deere, an emblem of American manufacturing, risks alienating precisely the constituency he needs most in the 2026 midterms. Several farm state Republicans in Congress have privately urged the White House to water down the tariff threat or grant transitional relief to Deere. Senator Joni Ernst, RIIA, told reporters on April 18th that we must ensure our farmers have the tools they need at prices they can afford, and suggested Congress might intervene if the administration did not act. House Agriculture Committee Chair Glenn Thompson, RPA, warned of a potential backlash at the ballot box if farmers are forced to pay exorbitant import duties on equipment. Yet Trump's core trade advisors argue that bowing to Deere would signal weakness to foreign governments in ongoing WTO negotiations and bilateral talks with China, the EU, and Japan. Their view, the pain inflicted on Deere must serve as a credible deterrent to both offshore production and chronic trade deficits. As May unfolds, all eyes are on two critical dates. First, May 5th marks the deadline for companies to file exclusion requests under the president's tariff proclamation. Deere will submit dozens of filings for its most critical product lines, though past precedent suggests only a fraction succeed. Second, on May 15th, the administration may announce tariff rate adjustments based on review of trade deficit data and lobbying pressure. A compromise might emerge, a reduction of the punitive 200% levy to a more modest 25% applied only to non-U.S. origin content above a certain value threshold. In the meantime, Deere dealers have halted non-essential orders of Mexico-built models. Some U.S. plants have ramped up shift schedules, and grain growers are weighing whether to repair aging equipment or risk a costly purchase. Economists warned that prolonged uncertainty will depress capital expenditures, potentially shaving 0.2 percentage points off GDP growth this quarter. As the clock ticks toward midday, the John Deere Trump tariff saga has sparked a far-reaching dialogue that ripples through boardrooms in Chicago, stock exchanges in New York, combined cabs in Nebraska, and policy think tanks in Washington, D.C. What began as an executive edict to reciprocate trade imbalances with blanket levies has morphed into a high-stakes dance of legal jousting, supply chain gymnastics, grassroots lobbying, and strategic repositioning. Now, with no clear end in sight, every stakeholder from small-town equipment dealers to global parts suppliers is bracing for a cascade of consequences. While Deere's government affairs teams labor to win narrow exclusions, a parallel effort is unfolding in the judicial arena. In the past week, a coalition of manufacturers led by John Deere and Caterpillar filed suit in the U.S. Court of International Trade, challenging the president's authority to impose punitive 200% tariffs on domestic companies under existing statutes. The plaintiffs argue that Congress never granted the executive branch such sweeping power when the goods originated from U.S. firms' own facilities abroad. Their complaint cites precedents from early 20th century tariff cases, contending that retroactive levies of this magnitude violate due process norms and exceed the scope of Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. Legal experts predict that if the court grants an injunction, it could forestall the tariff deadline pending full adjudication, potentially buying Deere precious breathing room. The government's overreach here is unprecedented, notes Robert Lighthizer, a former U.S. trade representative turned private practitioner. If these tariffs stand unchallenged, it fundamentally alters the balance of authority between the legislative and executive branches on trade matters. Conversely, a swift dismissal would leave corporations with no choice but to absorb or pass on the added costs beyond border skirmishes. Supply chain engineers at Deere and its suppliers are redrawing the global map. In Hanover, Germany, Siemens Industrial Turbo Machinery is exploring expanded machining capacity to serve Deere's North American plants as an alternative to Machias-sourced engine blocks currently routed through Mexican assembly lines. In Toronto, Linear Corporation is evaluating whether to add a Nearett-shaped forging cell for front-end loader arms, enabling Canadian origin parts that could reclassify final assemblies under NAFTA preferences. At the same time, Deere engineers in East Moline, Illinois, are prototyping modular designs that decouple electronics such as GPS guidance units and telematic sensors from core machinery. By separating high-value control modules from the steel chassis, Deere could manufacture the heavy structural components domestically while sourcing the electronic subsystems from lower-cost partners without triggering the punitive tariff threshold. This lean engineering approach would not only mitigate tariff exposure, but also enhance after-sales service and upgradability attributes that appeal to tech-savvy precision agriculture customers. Meanwhile, on the Great Plains, farmers are adapting in real time. Some grain growers in North Dakota have banded together to form cooperatives that pool resources for equipment leasing, reducing individual capital outlays in the face of uncertain tractor pricing. In Kansas, a group of row crop producers is experimenting with autonomous drone swarm weeding systems to prolong the life of existing tractors, minimizing tillage passes and thus reducing wear on engines and hydraulics. Dairy operators in Wisconsin have doubled down on refurbishment services for aging skid steers, as the cost of new machines threatens profit margins already strained by feed and fuel expenses. At the same time, younger farmers in states like Mississippi and Alabama are leveraging social media channels, Facebook Live demonstrations, Instagram short-form videos, TikTok explainers to crowdsource adaptations on older equipment. Their 3D printing replacement parts for broken hydraulic fittings, digital scanning worn gear teeth to reverse engineer spares, and sharing template files on farm-focused maker platforms. What began as a fringe maker movement is now gaining traction as a hedge against both supply chain disruptions and punitive trade policies. On Capitol Hill, the Deere conflict has become a litmus test for Republican unity. House leadership held a closed-door session with farm state members during which Representative Kevin Brady, RTX, cautioned that without swift relief, midterm turnout among rural voters could erode the GOP's advantage. Conversely, conservative hardliners in the Freedom Caucus, echoing Navarro's warnings, insist that no carve-outs should be granted, arguing that blanket exemptions only embolden foreign competitors and undermine America's negotiating leverage. At town halls across the Midwest, constituents have seized on the Deere dispute to press incumbents on broader trade policy. In Iowa's 3rd District, farmer listeners wielding smartphones submit impromptu video testimonies that go viral within local news circuits. One woman brandishes a mortgage statement lamenting that a 200% tariff on her next combine would obliterate her profits. Another retired veteran recounts growing up soldering wiring harnesses in Deere's Mullen plant, urging lawmakers to protect domestic jobs. These emotionally charged dispatches feed into a feedback loop, intensifying pressure on both the White House and congressional Republicans to broker a face-saving compromise. Beyond U.S. corridors of power, America's sharp-edged tariffs on its own firms have caught the attention of trading partners. In Ottawa, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister summoned the U.S. ambassador to lodge a protest, pointing out that punitive levies on Deere's Mexican and Canadian production run counter to the letter and spirit of USMCA. Mexico's economy minister warned that retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural exports like corn, soybeans, and dairy products could follow if Washington does not rescind the 200% measure. Meanwhile, in Brussels, EU trade officials are assessing whether to challenge the new U.S. tariffs at the World Trade Organization. They argue that these tariffs contravene WTO rules on national treatment and impose indirect taxation of domestic enterprises. Even China, long the prime target of Trump's trade wrath, issued a pointed statement. While Beijing deplores U.S. tariff barriers on Chinese exports, it also finds it notable that Washington would threaten its own multinationals, underscoring the weaponization of trade policy in all its forms in a rare display of multilateral solidarity. Tokyo joined Ottawa and Brussels in a joint communique deploring any unilateral measures that distort markets and punish domestic firms for exercising legitimate investment decisions. Back in New York, analysts at J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs have begun to model earnings per share impacts under various tariff scenarios. If the 200% levy were reduced to 50%, but applied only above a $50,000 import value threshold, Deere's equipment costs might rise by 7% on aggregate, translating to a 50 cents per share drag on earnings in fiscal 2025. Under a worst-case 200% levy with no carve-outs, costs could swell by 25%, slicing more than $1.50 per share according to Goldman's projection. Yet even the possibility of judicial relief or negotiated exemptions has been priced in. Deere's stock, which plunged 18% on the tariff announcement, has recovered roughly half its losses on speculation of a compromise, demonstrating investors' belief that the White House will eventually blink. Other machinery makers, CNH Industrial, AGCO, and Kubota, have seen similar gyrations as traders assess whether their own offshore footprints make them next in line for punitive measures. In laboratories and R&D centers, Deere's engineering teams are seizing this moment to accelerate innovation. The company is piloting hydrogen fuel engines for heavy machinery, eliminating dependence on foreign steel grades treated with tariffs-exposed alloys, and exploring on-site metal additive manufacturing to produce wear parts in remote locations. Trials of augmented reality maintenance tools are underway, allowing rural dealers to perform complex diagnostics and repairs without shipping units back to central facilities. By leapfrogging to these advanced capabilities, Deere aims to diversify its value proposition beyond brute manufacturing cost. They're offering subscription-based service models in which farmers pay for hours of uptime rather than owning depreciating assets. Such equipment as a service could insulate Deere from future tariff shocks. If machines and parts circulate under long-term service agreements, the classification of cross-border transfers becomes more nuanced, potentially avoiding punitive levies. John Deere's predicament is instructive for any multinational enterprise whose production and assembly transcend borders. In boardrooms from Seoul to Sao Paulo, corporate strategists are recalibrating their risk models. They're evaluating whether to accept higher labor costs domestically in exchange for regulatory stability, or to pay lower wages offshore while being hostage to unpredictable political winds. Scenario planning exercises now routinely include tariff tsunami outcomes, complete with wargaming of border inspection delays, customs valuations, and legal contests. Moreover, the Deere case underscores the limits of unilateral trade policy in an interconnected world. When a country penalizes its own firms, it blunts the efficacy of retaliatory threats against foreign adversaries and undermines the credibility of its trade negotiators. As the global economy braces for further fragmentation, regional trade blocs, digital tariffs, and carbon border adjustments become increasingly relevant. The imperative for multilateral frameworks that balance sovereignty with certainty becomes ever more apparent. As May 15th approaches, the question is whether the administration will ratchet down its demands in the face of mounting political, legal, and economic pressures, or double down to preserve what advisors see as a hard-earned deterrent against offshoring. A moderated tariff, say 50% on non-US content above a specified value, would still sting but allow Deere to pass on manageable costs and preserve its customers' purchasing plans. Conversely, maintaining the 200% rate risks not only crippling Deere's domestic business, but also fracturing the alliance between manufacturing CEOs and the administration that propelled Trump to victory. For farmers, the outcome will shape planting and investment decisions for years. A resolution that tames the tariff threat could unleash pent-up demand, driving a wave of equipment sales that fuels agricultural productivity. A harsh resolution could tip many operations into unprofitability, accelerating consolidation into larger farms better able to absorb capital expenditure shocks. For equipment manufacturers, the Deere precedent will inform where they build factories, which components they source domestically, and how they structure global supply chains. For policymakers, it will be a test of whether trade can be wielded as a precise scalpel, or whether politicized tariffs become a blunt instrument that wounds friend and foe alike. The Deere saga has also catalyzed a re-evaluation of how companies communicate risk and strategy to their stakeholders. Traditionally, Deere's quarterly earnings calls were circuits of measured optimism, commentary on crop prices, R&D milestones, and modest margin improvements. Now, CFO Ryan Campbell has had to balance technical financial disclosures with searing assessments of geopolitical risk, outlining worst-case tariff scenarios alongside best-case negotiation outcomes. This candor, while unsettling for some investors, has earned praise from governance experts who argue that transparent discussions of policy risk foster more resilient capital markets. In private investor meetings, Deere executives have begun hosting mock war rooms with scenario analyses live modeled, enabling shareholders to grasp the trade-offs between domestic assembly costs and tariff-induced price shocks. Beyond financial circles, the debate over the Trump-Deere conflict has influenced academic research agendas. At agribusiness conferences, papers that might have focused narrowly on yield optimization or supply logistics now incorporate chapters on trade policy volatility. Scholars at Kansas State and Iowa State universities are collaborating on multi-institutional studies, quantifying the elasticity of farmer demand under tariff regimes. They are examining not just immediate purchase deferrals, but longer-term shifts toward used equipment markets, cooperative leasing models, and alternative cropping systems. Preliminary findings suggest that a protracted tariff standoff could depress first-time equipment purchases by up to 20% over a 3-year cycle. This could reshape the demographics of farm ownership and potentially accelerate generational turnover on family farms. Meanwhile, media coverage of the dispute has transcended the usual business pages, moving into cultural commentary about America's manufacturing identity. Journalists and documentarians are tracing John Deere's evolution from its 19th century blacksmith origins through the Industrial Revolution, the green-painted golden era of post-war agriculture, to its modern incarnation as a data-driven equipment provider. These narratives interrogate what made in America means in a world where few products are purely domestic or wholly foreign. One PBS feature recently juxtaposed scenes of Iowa's rolling cornfields with drone footage of Deere's Monterey plant, a visual metaphor for the blurred lines of globalization. Politically, the Deere confrontation has inspired some legislators to push for more durable trade policy framework. Proposals on Capitol Hill now include legislation that would require congressional approval for any tariff exceeding 25% or any retroactive levy on goods of U.S. origin. This is a check on executive discretion aimed at preventing future abrupt edicts. These bills, though unlikely to pass in their current form, signal a growing bipartisan appetite for rebalancing trade authority between branches of government. For agrarian lobbyists, tying such proposals to Farm Bill reauthorization has become a strategic priority, given the broad support for agricultural funding and the political leverage wielded by rural legislators. On the ground in manufacturing towns, the uncertainty has reinvigorated labor management dialogues. Deere's unions and local workforce development boards have convened joint task forces to explore training programs that could upskill U.S. workers for emerging roles in additive manufacturing, autonomous vehicle maintenance, and precision agriculture software management. Rather than viewing tariff-induced reshoring solely as a means to fill existing assembly jobs, these discussions frame it as an opportunity to transition displaced workers into higher-value positions that support the next generation of farm technology. Such initiatives, still in their infancy, represent a proactive approach. The approach to aligning workforce skills with evolving industry demands internationally is creating quite a ripple effect. The Deere case, in particular, is prompting some governments to contemplate their own industrial policies. In Brazil, policymakers are debating incentives to encourage local content requirements for agricultural machinery. They are hoping to attract investment from companies wary of U.S. tariff risks. Australia's Department of Agriculture is studying the Deere-Trump timeline as a cautionary tale. They are evaluating whether greater domestic production capacities for farm equipment might justify temporary protectionist measures. These discussions underscore a paradox. Efforts to shield domestic industries can spur a new wave of nationalist manufacturing strategies, perpetuating the very fragmentation that global trade frameworks seek to avoid. For the technology partners who supply Deere's advanced systems, firms like Trimble, Raven Industries, and John Deere's own in-house software divisions, the tariff turmoil presents both challenge and opportunity. On one hand, any reduction in tractor sales dampens demand for GPS guidance modules, telematics services subscriptions, and predictive maintenance analytics. On the other, Deere's push toward modular high-margin electronic components could enable these partners to expand direct-to-farm sales models, bypassing the traditional OEM channel. Startups specializing in ag-tech data platforms are quietly courting Deere's dealer network, positioning their cloud-native solutions as tariff-insulated services that complement core machinery regardless of assembly location. As the dust settles, whether via court injunction, negotiated compromise, or legislative check, the Deere-Trump episode will leave an indelible mark on corporate strategy, farm economics, and trade governance. In the best-case resolution, Deere emerges with a more agile, diversified supply chain and enhanced stakeholder transparency. Farmers gain clarity on investment planning, and policymakers craft more balanced trade authorities. In the harsher outcome, the precedent of penalizing domestic firms' foreign operations could linger, chilling cross-border investment and stunting the modernization of critical industries. Whatever the eventual day, the story of Trump versus Deere transcends the mechanics of tractors and tariffs. It distills the paradox of 21st century globalization, the tension between the sovereignty of national policy and the efficiency of dispersed production. Within this tension lies both the risk of unilateral disruption and the promise of adaptive resilience. And in that space, the decisions made by leaders in Washington, executives in Duke and Moline, and farmers in fields from Kansas to Argentina will chart the course for how nations and companies navigate an increasingly interconnected world. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us what are your thoughts on Trump and John Deere's tariff conflict? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.